My name is Nicole Kozycki. I'm an immigration attorney at Kozycki Law, and today we're going to prepare for your adjustment of status interview. Everything we talk about today has to do with a marriage-based adjustment of status after someone has legally entered the United States and then married a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident. We're providing this for our clients, so we've already vetted your case for any potential issues, and you should be ready to go now that your interview is scheduled. The first thing you should do when you receive your interview notice from USCIS is to look at the bottom left-hand corner and make sure that you know where your interview is scheduled. Some clients are not scheduled in the closest USCIS field office, and you can be rescheduled, or you can be scheduled at a different office outside of your home state. So there are clients in Atlanta that do have to go to Montgomery, Alabama sometimes, or Greer, South Carolina, and that's outside of our control. So know where your interview has been scheduled and know what time and day your interview is scheduled so that you don't accidentally miss it. You can only get to the field office location 30 minutes prior to your interview time. They will not let you into the building more than 30 minutes before your interview. When you arrive at USCIS, you will go into the field office, you'll go through security. You can bring your phone into the building, but you can't bring any liquids into the building. And you should be with your spouse when you enter USCIS. In the Atlanta field office, they've changed their check-in protocol. After you go through security, you'll go to the elevators. You can't get lost because there are signs everywhere. They won't let you anywhere other than where you're supposed to be. You'll go in through security to the elevators, and you'll go either to the second or the third floor. And the floor is designated on your interview notice. You'll go to the second or third floor, and you will check in with a USCIS officer on that floor. There will be a line and a check-in window. At that time, they'll give you a number, and you'll sit and wait for your number to be called. Now keep in mind that at this point, your case is already assigned to a specific ISO, an Immigration Service Officer, and you're waiting for that particular officer to become available. So if your number is J213 and they call 215, 217, 225, they have not missed you or forgotten you. You are waiting for a very specific person to conduct your interview. So don't let that worry you. Do be prepared to wait. It's not uncommon to wait 2-3 hours before your interview. The actual interview itself is not going to be longer than an hour, but it's not uncommon to have to wait a long time before you go back. That's why it's important to be on time, or to be the 30 minutes early that you're allowed to be, so that you don't delay your own interview. There are two purposes to an adjustment of status interview at USCIS. One is to make sure that the copies of documents that were filed in your case are genuine and authentic, and that's why you've been instructed to bring certain original documents with you to the interview. We have already provided you a document checklist specific to your interview, so you don't have to worry about the long stock checklist on the interview notice. Review the interview document checklist that we've provided from our office, and the very first section are the original documents that you have to bring. Obviously, you'll have your appointment notice. You have to bring the petitioner, the U.S. citizen's passport or naturalization certificate or birth certificate, just to prove that the petitioner is a U.S. citizen, either born or naturalized. For the immigrant, for the applicant for adjustment of status, you have to bring your passport and your original birth certificate. If you have multiple passports, bring them all, but the most important passport is going to have your U.S. visa from when you entered the United States the most recent time. It's very important because it's required for adjustment of status through marriage. Aside from passports and birth certificates, you also have to bring your original marriage certificate or a certified copy of your marriage certificate, and original divorce decrees for both spouses if there were any prior marriages. Bring them all, and bring the originals or certified copies. If you have any biological children together, you should bring their birth certificate. You do not have to bring the child. If you have a U.S. citizen child together, you don't have to bring your children. Like I said, you might be there for a few hours, but you do need to bring their original birth certificate. You also need to bring original criminal history documents if the applicant for adjustment of status has ever been arrested anywhere in the world. You need to bring certified copies of the criminal dispositions and the arrest documents, not for the U.S. citizen, but for the immigrant. The most important original document that you're going to need to bring is also your medical exam in a sealed envelope. So in our office, we don't file the medical exams up front because USCIS can lose them. We want you to do the medical at the end of the process and bring that to the interview. So don't forget to bring it with you, and don't forget to give it to the interviewing officer when you're in the interview. But that outlines the original documents that you need to bring, and the purpose of bringing them to the interview is so that the officer can verify their authenticity. The second point to the interview is, of course, to confirm that your marriage is genuine. Being married to a U.S. citizen in and of itself is not a path to residency. You have to be in a genuine, what they would call a bona fide marriage, and you have to prove that. You have the burden of proof. Now, we of course submitted some marriage evidence when we filed the adjustment of status packet, but you need to update all of that. On our document checklist, we've outlined some ideas of things that you might have to show the officer that your marriage is genuine. Keep in mind, you're going to bring copies of all of your bona fide marriage evidence because they are going to want to hole punch that evidence and put it in the file to support their decision. You should bring 6 months of your joint bank account statements. You should bring your joint lease, photos together, photos from your wedding, photos that you've taken since the petition has been filed. If you have traveled at all together, it's very important that you bring the travel itineraries, hotel receipts, Airbnb confirmation, anything to show that you have traveled together because that shows that you spend quality time together, and that would support a favorable finding of bona fide marriage. You should also bring joint leases, joint utilities, insurance, car insurance, health insurance, life insurance, literally anything that bears both of your names. You should bring a copy of that evidence to the interview. If you're on social media and you post pictures of each other, you can screenshot that and print that out. If you talk on the phone or you text, you can ask your phone company for records to show that you're in constant communication, because again, that evidence would show that you're in a bona fide marriage. If you want to bring this to our office, we can copy it for you ahead of your interview. You need to bring copies that you're willing to leave at USCIS. On that note, if you're going to bring photos and they're in a beautiful album from your wedding or trips that you've taken, bring a copy outside of an album so that they can hole punch those photos either on photo paper or even on copy paper and put those in the file to support their decision. You can still bring them in the album to show them that they mean something to you and that they're important to you, but bring a copy of the pictures for them to put in the file as well. When you first go into the interview, they're usually going to start, well, first, when you walk in, you're going into the immigration service officer's office. You're not going to be in a conference room. It's their actual office where they work. And when you go in, you're going to remain standing. They'll instruct you to remain standing. The immigrant applicant for adjustment of status will be fingerprinted on the desk with a portable fingerprint machine, and their picture will be taken. This is for identity verification to make sure that the person who is supposed to be in the interview is actually there. Then you will sit down with your spouse. If your attorney is present in the interview with you, we have to sit behind you in the corner. The purpose of that is that you're not allowed to see what we're writing or if we're writing. But aside from that, our role in the interview is just to take notes. We're only allowed to elaborate on legal issues, like if you've had a criminal arrest or if there's been a fraud allegation. But the questions, most of the questions are predominantly for you, because they're about the genuine nature of your relationship. So the Immigration Service Officer is going to have on their desk your alien file, your A file, and anything that's ever been filed on your behalf, aside from asylum applications, because those are confidential. But anything that we've filed for your adjustment of status, or if you had a prior application, that will all be on their desk in your file. But the Immigration Service Officer is going to want to confirm certain information from you, and they're going to flip through the Form I-130, which is the U.S. Citizens Petition for the Immigrant, and they're also going to go through the Form I-485, which is the immigrant's application for adjustment of status, and they're going to want to confirm that all of the information that's disclosed is actually accurate. At this time, they'll handwrite on the forms if they want to change your address, if you've moved, if you've changed employers, if anything has changed since filing, they'll just handwrite on the forms, have you sign that change has been made. This is their first opportunity to quiz you and your spouse about how much you know about each other. So when they're flipping through the I-130, they might ask the husband what the wife's parents' names are. They might ask the wife where the husband is employed or the address of the employer. This is their first chance to see how much you know about each other. We've already provided from our office some common interview topics, and we'll go through those in just a minute. But when they flip through the forms, it's not uncommon to ask questions of the opposite spouse to confirm information. At the end of the I-485, there are a lot of questions for the immigrant applicant that have to do with inadmissibility issues. They ask about your intentions in the United States, whether you've ever been involved in drug trafficking, polygamy, if you're a communist supporter, all of these things that are big red flags to the U.S. government. Most of your answers are going to be no to those questions. There are two things that do come up that you need to know that they can be disclosed. Have you ever violated the terms of your non-immigrant status? The answer for a lot of our clients is yes, because you're a visa overstay. If you came to the United States and you overstayed your visa, you violated the terms of your non-immigrant status. Now, that is not a bar to adjustment, and so don't have any pause about disclosing or saying yes that you have violated the terms of your non-immigrant status. The other question that might be a yes is, have you ever worked in the United States without authorization? Again, not a bar to adjustment, doesn't need a waiver, not an adverse consideration at all. So you can disclose if you've worked in the United States without authorization. So don't be surprised if you hear those two questions and you feel that yes is probably the best answer. You can say yes, you have worked in the United States without authorization. Yes, you have violated the terms of your non-immigrant visa if you have overstayed, and those won't have a negative effect on your green card application. Rarely they will separate spouses for an interview. That's normally, if they're going to have a second interview, they would separate you. Normally a first interview, if there are no red flags, is a joint interview, and they're going to ask you questions about each other. What they really want to confirm is that you live together, if you live together. If you don't live together, why not? And they want to make sure that you have a marital relationship, that you're not just roommates, you're not just best friends, but that you're in a marital relationship. And so we've given you a copy of some common questions, and I'll go through them now and just tell you how to prepare. You really need to know your spouse's full name and date of birth. It might sound very simple, but when people get in interviews and they get nervous, they tend to forget very important details. So know how to spell it and write out your spouse's full name and date of birth. Also know their parents' names, their siblings' names, know where their parents live, where their siblings live, where you fall in the birth order. Maybe your spouse is the youngest of 4 siblings. Know about their family details and some details about their upbringing. If anybody has children, whether together from this marriage or from a previous relationship, you should know their names and hopefully their date of birth as well, or at least their ages. They're going to ask you how you met, who introduced you, or where did you go on your first date. They can ask side questions about who got there first, or how, did you take Uber or did you take MARTA? So they're trying to figure out whether you actually went on the first date, whether you're actually telling the truth. They'll ask you who proposed to who, how did you decide you were going to get married, when did you get married. Know your anniversary just quickly. Just know the date you got married. They're going to ask, where did you get married? Did anybody come? Did you go to the courthouse? Did you have a big wedding? How did you celebrate? Did you have a reception? Did you go out to eat? What was your wedding day like, and who was present for that celebration? They also really want to confirm that you live together. They can ask you how many bedrooms your house is, what kind of floor they have in the kitchen or the living room, different details, how many windows are in your master bedroom. These are things that if you visited, you might not know the answer to, but if you're definitely living there, then you would know the answer. If they ask you something that you do not know the answer to, if they ask you a question and you do not know, just say that you do not know, and hopefully you can provide an explanation on why you didn't know how to answer their question. Maybe you don't know your wife's father's name because you haven't talked about him much, or maybe you don't remember how many windows are in your master bedroom. You never really gave it much thought. Let them into your relationship. Be honest with them and let them get to know you. The immigration service officers interview people all day, every day. They're very good at this, and they will be very suspicious if they think you're holding back. So let them get to know you. Answer their questions fully. If you don't know the answer, you can explain that to them and be comfortable with their questions. They will want to know how you split your roles in your marriage and your relationship. Who does the cooking? Who pays the bills? Where does the money come from? Do you actually have access to each other's finances? They're going to want to know if you have joint accounts, why or why not. A lot of our clients report that they have trouble getting joint bank accounts because only one person has a social security number. If they ask you why you don't have joint finances and that's the situation, explain that to them. With the delays with EADs and social security numbers, it's more and more common that people aren't able to have joint bank accounts, but do everything you can to show them that you're sharing your finances with each other. You need to know where each other works and what the work schedule is like, where it is. If your husband takes the MARTA to work, then you should know the station that he goes to. You need to know about your daily lives together. Also, it's very important if your spouse has been married previously that you at least know that they were married before. Hopefully maybe their name and the circumstances of why that didn't work out. That's also a common question. They're not trying to trick you in these questions. They really are just trying to figure out if you have a marital relationship that's going to confer immigration benefits. If this interview is taking place before you've been married for 2 years, you're going to be granted conditional resident. Well, it's not even the date of the interview, it's the date of approval, which we'll get to in a minute. But if you're married for less than 2 years, then you're a conditional resident, and then 2 years you have to remove the conditions and prove again your marriage is genuine. However, if you're approved after your 2-year anniversary, they're going to grant you permanent residency and you never again have to prove your marriage. And they take that very seriously. So if you are after the 2-year wedding anniversary, they might apply a little bit more marriage scrutiny to you, knowing that this is the only time they're going to get to examine your relationship. If you file joint taxes, you should bring your joint taxes, not because of the affidavit of support, but because it shows that your marriage is genuine and that you're sharing your finances together. So if your interview is falling outside the tax year from when you filed your adjustment, you might want to bring new taxes. You do not need to bring updated taxes for your joint sponsor. That's already in the file, and if there was a problem with your joint sponsor, they would have sent you a request for evidence and we would have already handled that. So the only taxes you need to bring to the interview are your most recent taxes if you filed jointly. At the end